Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and create our first S3 bucket. So this is a lab and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. The first thing I want you to notice is my region. So I'm currently in Northern Virginia, and we have a whole bunch of different regions that we can choose from. For the rest of this course, I'd like you just to use Northern Virginia. This is the default AWS region. It's where they roll out all their new products and services first. So you always have more services available in Northern Virginia than in other regions. So go ahead and just make sure you're on US East 1. And then what we want to do is we want to go over to our services and we'll find S3 here under storage because it's a storage service. So go ahead and click in there. Now, if you haven't used this service before, you're going to get this message saying, hey, you don't have any buckets. What we're going to do is go in and create a bucket. Before we do that, notice that our region has changed to global. So with S3, you get a global view of all your buckets. So let's go ahead and hit create bucket. In here, we need to enter in our bucket name. Now, if you remember in the last lecture, we talked about how bucket names must be unique, in that S3 is a unique namespace, in that S3 is a global namespace. So if I type in test bucket and go ahead and hit create, it's not going to let me create that because somebody has already taken that. I bet you somebody took that in 2006 when S3 first came out. So what I'm going to do is going to type a cloud guru, and then I'm just going to do a whole bunch of random letters or random numbers. And in here, we can select our region. Now, like I said, there are some regions that S3 is not yet available in. So we've got Hong Kong or Bahrain. By the time you watch this video, it may well be available in there. What I'm going to do is just leave it as US East 1 or Northern Virginia. You can copy your settings from an existing bucket, but because we don't have any buckets, we can't actually do that just yet. But bear in mind, when you start creating buckets, you can basically clone the exact same settings from one bucket to another just by using this drop-down box. Let's go ahead and hit next. In here, this is where we can do all our different things. So this is where we configure our options for our buckets. So we can turn on versioning, which we're going to look at later. We can turn on server access logging, and this basically just logs all the requests for access to your buckets. We can create tags or key value pairs. So we might say, hey, this bucket is owned by the team, so that's our key, and then the value might be our accounting team or our finance team or our developers, etc., etc. In here, we can actually do object level logging, so we can actually go in and record access to individual objects or files. Down here, we've got encryption. Again, we're going to cover this off later on in the course. In here, we've got advanced settings, so we can actually permanently allow objects in this bucket to be locked, so we can lock our objects down to individual files. And we do have an S3 masterclass on the A Cloud Guru platform where we basically explore S3 in a whole bunch of detail. You don't need to know it in that a lot of depth for the Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam, but if you do want to learn it for work, we do have an S3 masterclass as well. And down here, we can use CloudWatch to monitor S3. Again, we'll cover off what CloudWatch is later on in the course, but essentially it's basically a way of monitoring or watching your cloud. So we're going to leave everything as default and go ahead and hit next. In here, this is a relatively new screen. Essentially, a lot of people were making their S3 buckets public, forgetting that they've put data in there, and then people were scanning S3, finding all these public buckets, and then looking at their data. Amazon basically essentially locks it down to make it almost impossible to make your bucket public unless you very deliberately intend to do so. So you can't do it accidentally by default. So you'll see here that block all public access is ticked by default. We can untick that. It will give you this big warning sign and make you acknowledge that the current settings may result that your files in this bucket will become public. I'm going to just make sure it's checked. I'm going to show you later on in this lecture how we can put objects in our bucket and then make them public. So just make sure that this is turned on right now. Let's go ahead and hit next and we can review all our information. So right now we're going to create a bucket name in Northern Virginia. We've disabled versioning. We've disabled basically everything. We've just left everything as default, and we've blocked all our public access permissions. And we're going to go ahead and hit create bucket. And that has now created my bucket. So let's go ahead and go into our bucket. So we click on it, we can see that our bucket is empty. Upload new objects to get started. So why don't we do exactly that? We'll go ahead and hit upload. We'll go add our files. I'll go over to, let's say, my downloads directory in here. And then I'm going to add 2 files. So this is a photo of me and Faye Ellis at Replay. Faye is one of my co-presenters on AWS this week. She also does the Developer Associate, Security Specialty, and the SysOps Associate with me. And then this is also a photo of me and my brother meeting Jeff Barr at reInvent in 2017. reInvent, by the way, is where Amazon essentially release all their products. It's held in Las Vegas at the end of the year, so it's where they release all their products and new services. And Replay is the big party at the end of that conference. And if you are lucky enough to go, come over and say hi to us. We always have a booth at reInvent every year. So I'm going to go ahead and hit upload. You can see in here it's in progress. Once it's successful, you'll see here that it's you have a success. That's basically your browser getting back a HTTP 200 code. And in here, we've got our 2 files now. So we've got the one of me and Faye, and we've got the one of me and my brother meeting Jeff Barr. Okay, so our objects have now successfully uploaded. If you click in this checkbox, you're going to get a whole bunch of information about your individual objects. So we've got the key, which is simply the file name. This is why sometimes it's referred to as key value pairs. In here, we've got the size, we've got expiration dates, expiration rules, we've got when it was last modified, we've got the object URL. Note the format that it's in, so it looks like a DNS name or a website domain. So it's the name of the bucket.s3. Amazon AWS.com, and then / and then the name of the file. Now, if we were in a different region, we'd also, like if we were in Ireland, for example, you'd see EU, West 1 as part of that domain name. And again, this is why objects need to have, this is why buckets need to have unique names, because it is creating a domain name. In here, we can see the properties, the different storage classes, whether or not we've got encryption turned on or off, whether or not the object itself is locked, etc., etc. Now, if we actually click into this object URL, what do you think is going to happen? Will we actually be able to view the object? Well, no, we're not. And you can see in here, access denied, access denied. So this object is not yet public. We have to go through a couple of steps to make it public. So I've just gone back in my browser. Let's go over to our bucket, and let's see if we click in here and we go over to our actions, you can see here we can do a whole bunch of different things. We can try and open it, we can download it, we can change the storage class, we can change encryption. If we go down to make public, you can see that it's grayed out. I can't even click on that as a button. So the next thing we're going to do is, how do we make this object public? Well, let's go back to S3 and click on our bucket, and we're going to click on Edit Public Access Settings. And in here, we're going to uncheck this box. We're going to make sure that it's unchecked. I'm going to go ahead and hit Save, and then it will ask us to confirm. So we have to go in and type confirm. Let's go ahead and do that. And then you'll be able to see we've got our success code in here. So, and you can see the access has changed now, where it says objects can be public. Now, does that mean our object is actually public? Well, no. If we click on it and then click on the link in here, you'll see we still get an access denied. If we go back to our object and we can click in here, make public, or you can go back to your bucket and just click in here and then go actions, you can now see that you can actually click the make public button. So let's go ahead and do that. Make public. And in here, we've now got a success code. If we uncheck this and check the object again, there we go. We can see there's me and Faye at Replay, which is the big party after reInvent, having some fun. Let's quickly go back. I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the photo of me and Jeff. You can select multiple objects at a time as well. So just go actions and then make public, and go ahead and make that public. Now, when you click on that image or click on that object URL, there you go, it will load. And you can send this URL to anyone in the world, and it will now serve that image. So there's me and my brother Sam. I think we're at the Mirage here at reInvent, and we've met Jeff Barr. I think this is 2017. Okay, so I've gone back. I should point out that we're doing everything at an object level so far. So we've been doing it for each individual file. We haven't been doing it for a bucket as a whole. Likewise, we can go in and we can click in here and we can change our storage class. So maybe, hey, I want to change it to intelligent tiering. Maybe I want to save some money and do one zone infrequently access. Maybe I want to just use standard infrequently access, etc. I'm going to turn on intelligent tiering just for this individual object. And that's all you do is click in there, and then you see here it's been successful. Now, if you want to do things to your bucket as a whole, you can go over to properties. We're going to look at versioning later on in this course. We're going to look at static website hosting. We're going to look at encryption as well. So you can, we will cover all that off. We're also going to look at transfer acceleration. So this is all being done on a bucket level, not on an individual object level. In permissions, we've got our block public access settings. So we have turned that off now. In here, we've got our access control list. So access control lists allow you to set fine-grained permissions all the way down to individual objects. So you could have, let's say, a finance, a bucket, and there's a particular object in there that you don't want some people in the finance team to be able to access. Maybe it's the payroll spreadsheet. You can actually block down to the individual object itself into that individual spreadsheet saying, hey, I don't want people to be able to access this apart from Joe Smith who works in payroll. When bucket policies work up to the bucket level. So rather than an individual, individual object level, bucket policies are applied to the entire bucket. And we're going to use this later on the course when we make a website using S3. We're going to apply a bucket policy that makes everything in our bucket public by default. CORS configurations we're going to cover off at the end of this course when we go in and create our serverless website. So that is in the very last section of the course. In here, we can click in management. We're going to look at lifecycle rules in a few lectures from now. We're going to look at replication as well. And we don't cover anything else off in this course. We are just trying to focus on what is relevant to the Solutions Architect Associate exam. However, like I said earlier, we do have a deep dive course on S3. So if you want to learn everything there is to know S3, go check that out as well. So let's go on to my exam tips. So onto my exam tips. What have we learned? We did cover off a lot of these in the last lecture, but I'm just going to remind you. So buckets are a universal namespace. You can't share the same name. When you upload an object to S3, your browser is going to get a HTTP 200 code. There's a bunch of different storage classes. You need to remember these going into your exam. So we've got S3, S3 infrequently accessed, S3 infrequently accessed one zone, and we then have Glacier. We have different flavors of Glacier depending on our retrieval times. And then finally, we learned that you can control access to your buckets either using a bucket ACL or using bucket policies. And we looked at that briefly. We will use bucket policies when we go to the serverless section of the course where we create a serverless website. So we will look at that later on in this course. So that's it for this lecture, everyone. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture, which is on S3 pricing tiers.